Welcome to this session on MiFID II. Are you all from financial services? Who's not from financial services? Yeah, a few hangers-on at the back. Okay, that's good. So MiFID II, you're absolutely right, is financial services regulation. But I was just looking at this title and thinking, well, actually, MiFID II is pretty irrelevant to this conversation, in fact. It's just another regulation. It could be EU GDPR that Christy was talking about in the previous session, perhaps. And then I was thinking, well, actually, we could simplify this title a little bit further, and we could get rid of the about the reporting bit, because it's not about the reporting, and actually, it could just be a presentation entitled, It's All About the Data. And it really follows on from what David Gorbett was saying this morning, about consolidating data, good data governance. And in fact, if you get that right, a lot of things fall into place. Anyway, my name's Daniel Roberts. I'm pre-sales at MarkLogic, and I spend most of my time working with financial services customers, many of who have a problem around regulatory compliance and about consolidating their data for regulatory compliance in this particular instance, and most of our customers currently, the problem is around MiFID II. But when MiFID II is finished, what's next? FRTB. Some of our customers have built solutions around CEF reporting. There's a whole host of other things and regulations which are coming down the line, which they need to solve. So this really is a little bit of a discussion point, this presentation, about the success we've had in that space and what people have focused on in their environments, and also how they got to this place in the first instance, because I think that really speaks volumes around the state of data within our organizations and the state of governance of that data within our organizations. So I've got a quick question for you in the audience here. How many databases, how many relational databases do you have in your organization? Who's got the biggest? Has anyone got more than 100 relational databases? More than 500 databases, relational databases, more than 1,000. Okay, you're the culprits here. Much more than that? Yeah, a lot more than that. And how many? 20,000. Well, the figure which I've got here is from one of our other prospects. They have 20,000 relational databases across their organization. And I don't know about you, but to my mind, that shouts data fragmentation, data everywhere, and it also shouts poor data governance. I know in an ideal scenario, all data will be in a single place and we'll be able to gather it, but even a slight reduction in that number of databases has got to be value for your organization. And many of our companies that we work with, especially around regulation, are actually moving on that path. They're looking to see, actually, how can we consolidate? How can we get more value from our data? And how can we remove ourselves from the unfortunate reality that we find ourselves in, which is massive data proliferation, massive solution proliferation across our organization that's causing incredible data fragmentation. I mean, this problem hasn't happened overnight, of course. It's happened over decades. We've built solutions in the relational database. Oh, we need to fix something. I know what we'll do. We'll create another relational database and some more infrastructure, and we'll pipe a load of data into it. I call it a YAD, or YADS, yet another data silo, just to put another acronym out there in that space. And these solutions could be either built internally, of course. We build our own solutions to solve problems, or they could be bought. And in the MiFID II space, what we see often, we've got a MiFID II problem coming up. We need to solve MiFID and report to the regulator on MiFID. How are we going to do that? I know. Let's go out and buy a MiFID II solution. Okay, a brilliant idea. That's going to be an application, of course, isn't it? That's going to be another relational database. It's going to be some more ETL from a lot of different places. Because as you know, MiFID II is all around storing trade data, order data, the supporting data with it, so we can report to the regulators. Hey, it makes the problem worse. So every time we fix a problem, every time we attempt to solve a risk, an issue, or an opportunity within our organizations, we're making the problem worse. We're exacerbating the problem which we have within our organizations. And so what I'm trying to say is, how can we stop this? How can we start thinking differently and start moving our organizations, not overnight, I appreciate, but over a period of time, to start thinking about our data differently, considering what our data means, and think about how we can start reducing the number of solutions. Because that really is the crux of the problem when it comes to regulation. Of course, how do we get there? It's pretty self-explanatory. You know, years ago, we'd have individual departments that want to manage their own data, look after their own data. So data ownership is a real issue in this problem. People are saying, well, actually, no, those are my customer records. I'm not letting you guys have them. I'm going to keep hold of those customer records, and that's my domain, that's my property that I've created. So really, at the department level, we've got a cultural issue here. It's very difficult to say, you know, hand over all your data to somewhere else within an organization. The business leaders, the senior people within your organization, want a view of everything. But the individuals, and I've seen this in many organizations, the individual organizations, the individual business units want to keep hold of their own P&L. I've seen it in many investment banks. They have their own environment, their own, say, equity derivative space, for example. One particular customer I can think of built their own solution, ran it on their own technology, not supported by anything else of the business, kept all their own data. It's very difficult to support that environment, and very difficult from a regulatory point of view to get a view of that data within it. So it's at the department level, it's super agile, of course, although it's on relational databases for the most part. It's agile because they have control of it. How can you relinquish that? That's a cultural thing within an organization, in my view, and something which needs to be managed from a very senior level within those organizations. But the problem, of course, is that you end up with something like this. And when it comes to regulation time, it's lots of ETL, loading data all over the place. You have this massive spaghetti mesh. And it's not just for regulation, it's also for running the business as well, right? So running the business, we want a view of our exposure for risk, of course. We want a view of, you know, our counterparty risk across all of our different aspects of the organization, certainly within investment banking. But these guys over here won't have a congruent view of what's going on. And it's that congruence of the data which helps you as investment banks, helps you understand your exposure, understand what's at risk for your organization, and helps you understand how you can run your business. How much capital do you need to run your business? How much space have you got within your capital adequacy to be able to deal with that? So the question to you guys is, how is your infrastructure and environment going to deal with this? How can you deal with this problem of ever-increasing regulation, the need to stay on top of your business, the need for changing regulations, without the continued fragmentation of your data across your organization? And that is really, I think, the nub of the problem. How can you get a single view of your data to solve the ever-increasing regulatory needs as well as the needs of your business? So what do we need? Well, it's not just actually for regulation. Regulation needs a consolidated view of those data items. And for many of our customers in the investment banking space, we've pulled data from multiple different systems, 5, 10, 20, 30, 40 systems, to be able to consolidate those for regulatory reporting. And people go, oh no, it's so difficult. I don't want, it's just, regulation is so awful for us. We have to do all this extra work. But actually, and David Corbett also made this point this morning, it's not just for regulation. If you get it right for your business, then regulation is actually much more simplified. We can actually solve the data problem within regulation much easier. So it's not just the regulators that require you to have a single view of your data and mandate it. Actually, the business want that as well. And if the business have that, then they can run things much better, much more improved. And so we need to think about how we can get that business and regulatory insight across all of those different functions. The problem there is we're looking to converge data models. And converging data models is difficult. And it's time-consuming and takes a long period of time. I've worked with customers, not on regulation space, although I see it there as well, but one customer that I worked with, they spent nearly 2 years trying to define a single canonical relational database model to store their data in. 2 years. And that's because during that 2-year period, all of those departments around the organization were fighting over what things should be called, which columns we should have, what was the content of those data items. Trying to nail down something which is a dynamic problem. Data changes shape all the time. And in the regulatory space, that changes space all the time. And if you look at, say, customer reporting, customer 360 style application, then attributes vary along those customer records. How do you solve that kind of problem? And so converging those data models is hard. And what makes it especially hard in regulation is that we've typically got a deadline associated with it. You've got to get MiFID II sorted by January 2018. So those problems, that consolidation of data within that timeline actually makes it exceedingly difficult. And so trying to solve those against those deadlines, we need to think about it in a different way. And we need to think about how we converge that data in a more dynamic way, not in that solid, structured way which we have with the relational world. The relational world means that we need to think about what things are in the future. I don't know about you, I can't predict the future. So we need a solution which will model and bend with the solutions for that convergence, which is what we require. So for example, what do we need? Governance and regulation. Well, of course, for that, we need to understand our data and govern our data properly. Consolidate and govern our data with the right attributes, understand what those attributes are across our organization, simplifies the problem. Of course, that's not a technology issue. For the most part, that is a people and process issue within the organization to define what your attributes are going to be. What are they going to be called across your organization? In an investment bank, we have counterparties which we interact with, right? Those counterparties are called many different things across your organization. And first simple part of data governance, let's get some naming right across our organization so we know how to integrate our data. So that's number one thing, so counterparty, counter underscore party, CP underscore ID, they all mean the same thing. Now, over time, we want to be able to rationalize those and harmonize those. And by storing those in a centralized repository like MarkLogic, actually, we can store those as is right now and still query them in a simple way. We don't have to kind of try and figure out that structure, that rigid schema associated with it. And then actually, we have semantics capabilities within MarkLogic, so we can actually express an ontology which says, actually, these things are the same. And then when we query them, we can actually query them as if they're the same thing and pull out the same data. But I see that as a kind of stepping stone in the right direction, because ultimately, when you go through the process of consolidating data and harmonizing it, ultimately, you want to start thinking about how you can utilize this newfound consolidation of data to switch off older systems. So this really, I think, often can be a stepping stone. And so create that governance, create that organizational workflow to identify what those are going to be, use that data which we identify from that process to store as metadata within the database alongside those records, and then go through that process of what I think of as semantic integration. I think if we actually had a common language for how we express things, then we'd be able to pull things together in a much more simple way. And in fact, we have all the technology to do that. I just don't think people have picked up and built it and used it within organizations. We have a completely global, standards-based way of interacting with documents and querying documents on the internet, and that's called HTML and HTTP. And we have links to be able to jump between documents. And that was created by Tim Berners-Lee, who was a British guy who invented the World Wide Web. But he also created a machine-readable format for storing data, and that's known as semantic triples and RDF, which we also support in our database. So we've got a machine-readable, standards-based way of expressing and exchanging data within MarkLogic. Wouldn't that be great to utilize that across your whole organization to help integrate data into a centralized repository? So that's where we're going with documents by embedding triples and metadata with them expressed in RDF. It's a standard-based mechanism for you to do interesting things. And in fact, it has its own query language as well in the form of Sparkle, which we'll talk about a little bit later on, which allows you to solve some of those dynamic issues. You've got a dynamic, machine-readable mechanism for storing and querying data. So if you put those in the context of the data landscape we find ourselves in, where we've got increased jurisdictional requirements, everything's changing all the time, increased granularity of data. So we've talked about MiFID II. Further down the line, we've actually got FRTB, the Fundamental Review of the Trading Book, which is going to be a massive change for how we manage risk, how we compute risk, how we're going to deal with that. Currently, I see in my customers, we have several repositories with trade and order data. Okay, that's great. We want to consolidate those together, but we've also got end-of-day risk data, which we're also storing in completely separate infrastructure. That doesn't really make much sense to me. You've got two complete stacks for two different parts of the business. How can we look to start converging those together as well to deal with that really, really tight, small level of granularity, which you'll see in regulations like FRTB, and do those, of course, in more and more real time as required by the regulator. And so really, rather than having this flaming nightmare that is more tooling for everything we do, with more people and more data duplication, which just exacerbates the problem, then we need to look at how we can reduce and solve this. So the nub there is, how can we solve regulatory reporting issues for the problem which we've got right now, MiFID II, for January next year, and do that quickly and easily? How can we solve regulatory reporting for all the other regulations which we have, whether it's actually MiFID II, or maybe it's even something non-finance related like EU GDPR? So how can we consolidate data, understand what that data means in a centralized location? So if you were in this session with Christy was doing earlier on, she talks about how we identify personal information across our organization. How do we do that in an organization where we've got 20,000 databases? In one particular company that we know of that we work with, they've actually sending out an internal team with spreadsheets to identify where all the personal information is across their organization. And they've got quite a few thousand databases as well. And you can imagine with their Surface Pros and Excel spreadsheets on there going, excuse me, yeah, would you like to tell me your first name, last name in your database? All right, let me just make a note of that. It's not really going to work, is it, when you're in a large organization like that? So it's not just how can we solve this existing problem, but how can we also make that strategic decision to evolve our data landscape over time away from 20 or 30,000 relational databases globally into, let's just say, a slightly reduced footprint or as small a footprint as we can, and where can we leverage technologies like MarkLogic to reduce that footprint and simplify a lot of those data issues that we have. And this is kind of precisely what many of our customers are doing, and they're doing that through, of course, MarkLogic. What else would the answer be? But they're doing that by understanding their data types, doing good data governance, and consolidating that data into that centralized location. By doing that, they get better visibility. And so for regulatory reporting, the customers that we have that are taking that first step, it's not a big bang approach where we want to stick those 20,000 databases into MarkLogic over a 6-month period. Of course, that's never going to happen. But we want to take incremental steps which give us incremental value over time. And that's why several of our customers here in Europe are building what we call regulatory reporting capabilities. It's not a MiFID II solution, or any other regulation solution. It's not a Dodd-Frank solution which they're building. They're building a platform for storing regulatory data as appropriate for their organizations. It's storing things like trade data and order data, of course, at a very simple, low level. That's what we need. We need to be able to store trade information. It could be in XML, it could be in JSON, it could have many different attributes and types within there. It could be called counterparty underscore ID, CP underscore ID, all that structured, semi-structured trade data coming into MarkLogic. That's good. Centralized location for us to build our application and for reporting. We can transform that for reporting. But there's lots of other data that we want alongside of that, don't we? So we might have some ISDA contract documents, for example. They could be in PDF, which we want to ingest in and store alongside that trade information. So we've got a centralized location to go and pull that out. And we might want to be able to search for those in interesting ways. And in fact, those unstructured sources we could do full text search on them, but wouldn't it be great if we could actually start understanding the context of that text as well? So do some entity extraction out of those documents and store those data items as triples within our database. Hey, we can then do real queries on that unstructured content and get real results out of them. So we've got a few customers across insurance, in fact, and also investment banking that are storing contract and policy documents, unstructured, that they've processed. They've pulled out semantic triples for those documents, and then they can do questions like, find me the total value of all of these policy and insurance policy documents which we have by running Sparkle queries against those documents. So structured queries on unstructured content, that's great. We can start actually leveraging a lot of this documentation which we have within our organization. And of course, then we've got reference data sources. This is the context stuff which David Gorbett was talking about this morning. We can pull in reference data, we can embed it within any of these other items as semantic triples, store it alongside, add it as provenance information into our systems. It gives us a great centralized reporting architecture for all of these regulations. Now, for the most part, we build these solutions based around the envelope pattern that we talked about this morning, that David Gorbett talked about. We take the original data, we wrap it, and then we harmonize it over time, enrich it, add metadata to it. It could be in semantic triples, it could be in any other format, and build that core dynamic set of data which we can use to then feed through rules as we choose into our regulatory engine to create the reports we need, which we can then send to the regulator through their appropriate endpoints. Quite simple. But look what else we've got on here. We've centralized a load of trade stores, a load of reference data and contracts associated with it. We can also feed directly off that data and look at some business level. We can drive business level reporting and business level queries on it. And so we can see how people can do things like e-discovery and auditing, but we could also use that same data to drive KPIs, key performance indicators for our business. Centralized location, we've got the data once, a golden source. Let's drive lots of things off it so we don't have this congruent data issue. And so that kind of reporting capability is, this centralized capability really drives some real value within that space. My argument is that once we've got here, how can we leverage this architecture again? Not by creating a new one, or maybe a new one, that would certainly simplify, but what else can we leverage within this space? Reference data, trade source data, maybe it's personal identifiable information. Maybe we want to leverage a similar style environment for EU GDPR so we know where our personal information is, what it means, where it is across our organization. So single capability, multiple use cases. In fact, we could take this a little bit step further. Rather than just having regulatory data like this, we can start maybe driving some of these other things which we talk about, as in FRTB, Fundamental Review of Trading Book. Even greater granularity of data there. Data's coming from end-of-day systems, we might want to crunch that data through an Apache Spark style infrastructure. We want to maybe do large scale computing on that in memory for really, really fast, doing lots of data crunching. Perhaps, similar, maybe we want to do VAR calculations currently in that, to generate a lot of data, add up that data, and then kind of put it into dimension data, which we can store in documents. So we're seeing people starting to build architectures out that start consolidating that risk and that order and trade data as well within the same infrastructure. So data can come in, we can aggregate it, we can enrich it with some lineage and information, most likely using the W3C Provo, the ontology around provenance, so you can add into your documents where it came from, who created it, who's the last person to change it. We might actually want to store that bitemporally, so we can go back to a point in time and say, this was the last person that changed this data and this is the state of it. But once we've got that data consolidated, we might actually want to further enrich it. So maybe using an external compute grid of some description. Spark is very popular in many of our customers, and they're utilizing that for large-scale crunching of data. And in fact, in MarkLogic 9, we have an API called the Data Movement SDK, which is all about massively parallelizing data and being able to move it into and out of MarkLogic in a highly parallelized, highly scalable, highly performant manner. So we can leverage those architectures and that other infrastructure which you have within your organization to consolidate it, to crunch it, and then start building out some of those data calculations which you need for FRTB. So things like liquidity, trying to figure out what your capital shortfall is, so they have the right amount of capital adequacy within your organization. So aggregation of data, crunching of data, all off that same view. So how do we create that view? I guess is the question. How do we view that data in many different ways? And in fact, David Gorbett talked about it this morning, how we take that original document data or textual data which is stored within MarkLogic and look at it through different lenses. We can create different views depending on who we want to consume that data. And so in MarkLogic 9, we have documents, of course. We create templates to view that data, and those templates can be document-focused, like typical records which we want to query and interact with. Great. We might actually also want to make those look like tables, because guess what? We've got a lot of legacy reporting tools within our organization that pretty much only work across relational data. So we do, of course, need to integrate and leverage those. So we can take our document data, make it look like tables, and then leverage it as part of our existing BI tooling. And in fact, we could also actually make some of that data look like semantic triples as well. So we could use Sparkle queries, use it for lookup and enrichment from other systems. So all these templates allow you to view that same data set in a different way and look at it from a different aspect. And then, as David also mentioned this morning, we can layer on top of that the Optic API, so we can do incredible, interesting joins across that data, whether it's document data, whether it's tabular data, however we want to aggregate it together. So store lots of data from data sources, use this challenge of regulatory compliance to get your data right, or at least start moving in that direction for good data governance, and then use that, once we've got that data, use that to create that single congruent view of our data, be able to look at it, and of course, above all, which is, I guess, coming back to where we started, start a different trend from where we're at, from increasing numbers of relational databases within our organization to one which is decreasing over time, and where our senior management realize that actually the IT business agility problem comes down to how we store and how we manage data, and educate them onto thinking about managing data in a different way to help try and solve this problem which we have. So where have we done this? We've done it in a couple of places, in fact, as you might imagine. So one of these banks here, Apparently I can't say who it is. They're a large investment bank. They use it for their core derivatives processing platform. So they store lots of data from upstream systems, which originally were all in Sybase databases. What's the problem with that? They're all relational. They're all different schemas. How do we consolidate it together for reporting and also to drive KPIs for our business? And so, of course, they managed it within using MarkLogic to consolidate that data. Single place, remove those problems out of their infrastructure. So super flexible. Here we are, cost efficient. One database, not the previous 20 Sybase databases. They've actually gone through that process of lots of data sources, centralized hub, great. Actually, we can now switch some of these off. We can get rid of them. We can just send the feeds directly into MarkLogic. We don't need these other relational databases. Use that as the core for our data. So it's a great solution there. Another one that's doing something similar, KPMG, they've built an entire platform around for regulation and onboarding of customers. It's a cloud-based solution. Again, they need to solve all kinds of issues when it comes to consolidating data, whether it's entity data, whether it's related to records, whether it's documents for contracts which they might want to review and search for. So semantic enrichment, store that data, and then provide a real-time endpoint to those end-user systems. So in a nutshell, key takeaways. The nub is the data. The nub is understanding your data and having it governed well across your organization. You can leverage MarkLogic to ease you along that road because you can start consolidating data out as it is in its less well-governed manner and then move that on over time, leveraging the technologies within the stack, such as schema-agnostic capabilities. We don't need to know the shape of the data necessarily, but then adding on things like semantic triples to try and link data together and smooth the differences which we have in our data and seamlessly moving us into that space. So allowing us to simplify that. Simplifying the data, of course, immediately makes it easier for us to solve some of those regulatory reporting issues. So MiFID II, if we've got the data in the same place, then actually the reports are relatively simple to write. It's getting the data in the right place at the right time. And so the data hub approach and the consolidation of that data means that we have customers that have built regulatory reporting solutions within 3 months, 4 months, 5 months. They've had their first initial implementations for all kinds of different regulations. But really quick, we don't have to have this issue of predefining the schema, which causes most of the problems. So consolidate, well-governed, the data, get it right, then your regulatory reporting will undoubtedly fall into place. Thank you. Any questions?
Wow, you've done such a great job.
There's one.
Oh, there we go.
Hello. You didn't mention the data hub at all in this talk. Do you use that at all to ingest the data?
As in the data hub framework directly? Well, in fact, I think certainly ABN AMRO and at least 2 of our other customers that I can think of are using the data hub framework as the basis for consolidating data together. So I haven't mentioned that, but absolutely that's a key technology that can be used. Any other questions?
Okay, well, thank you very much. Please, if you could put some feedback back into the app. And now there's a break up on the top 3rd floor. Thank you.
Thank you.